Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into Carl Jung's The Red Book today.
Oh, yeah, the Red Book. Definitely not your average bedtime read.
No kidding. It's intense. Where do we even begin with this thing?
Well, how about right at the start? I mean, the first entry alone is enough to knock you off your feet.
You're talking about that whole flood vision, right?
Exactly. Jung describes this horrific vision, this monstrous flood sweeping across Europe.
Bodies in the water, right?
Yeah, swirling in the water. Just a massive wave of destruction. And he said this vision went on for like an hour.
An hour. Can you imagine? And it talks about feeling this mix of, like, perplexity and nausea, even shame.
It just goes to show, right, how potent the unconscious can be, this raw emotional power. And Jung was convinced that it was this force that shaped, well, everything, our thoughts, our emotions, even, he thought, our creative impulses.
Which, I mean, that's kind of what we're always talking about on the show, right?
Yeah.
The connection between those brilliant creative sparks and the potential for, well, for things to go a little haywire mentally.
Exactly. And the Red Book is like right on the edge of that, Genius on one side, mental instability on the other. Some people saw this whole period as Jung just losing it.
Going off the deep end.
Totally. But then others think this is where his most groundbreaking ideas came from.
So which was it? Was he wrestling with his inner demons? Or was he, like, dancing with the muses?
Right. I mean, he even said at one point he felt like he was trapped in an insane asylum. An insane asylum of his own making, he called it.
And he wasn't being metaphorical,
Yeah.
right? He was actually seeing things,
Yeah.
interacting with these mythological figures like they were real.
Yeah, it's like that's a key thing to understanding Jung, right? This idea that the unconscious isn't just some abstract concept. It's alive, a dynamic force, and it communicates through these symbols, through myths. And the Red Book is basically Jung's attempt to figure out what it's saying.
He also documented his dreams in the Red Book.
Right.
And we're talking about the guy who basically invented dream interpretation.
Right, exactly. He's writing down all these incredibly detailed descriptions of his dreams.
There's one where he's in, like, a castle apartment, and this bird suddenly transforms into a little girl. Yeah. And she starts talking about, like, the male dove and the 12 dead, and then she just vanishes. It's wild.
I know. I mean, even Jung, the guy who practically wrote the book on dreams, found this stuff bewildering. It just shows how deep and complex the unconscious really is.
So, okay. We've got Jung battling mythological beings, deciphering these cryptic dreams. How does all of this connect to creativity?
That's where Jung's idea of the archetypes comes in. Think of them as these universal primal patterns embedded in all of us. They're kind of like blueprints for our emotions, our behaviors, and yeah, our creative impulses too.
So you're saying these ancient patterns are bubbling away in our unconscious minds, influencing our creativity.
Exactly. And Jung believed that by tapping into these archetypes, you could unleash tremendous creative power.
Can you give us an example of this from the Red Book?
Sure. There's this one incredible encounter he has with Izdubar.
Izdubar.
Yeah, the legendary king from Mesopotamian mythology. Izdubar, the king of Uruk.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what happens?
Well, it's actually kind of unexpected. Jung's scientific and rational thinking.
The way he normally approaches the world.
Yeah, exactly. Jung realizes that this rational thinking actually makes Izdubar weak and vulnerable. Like, Izdubar starts to literally wither in Jung's presence.
No way. So, like, the hero is weakened by the
That's
scientist.
crazy, right? And then, get this, Jung, because he's afraid of what might happen to Izdubar, performs this, like, almost magical ritual using these ancient Vedic scriptures and manages to restore him, even helps Izdubar be reborn in a new form.
Okay, wait. Hold on a second. I need to wrap my head around this. Are you saying that Jung is basically arguing that our modern rational world is clashing with these powerful ancient forces in our unconscious minds?
Exactly. And it shows just how tricky it can be to even engage with these archetypes, especially, he thought, for younger people, people who are already trying to figure out who they are and what their purpose is.
Going through that whole identity crisis thing.
Right. Imagine being bombarded with these intense archetypal energies on top of everything else. It can be a recipe for some serious inner turmoil.
Okay, so that's the potential downside. It can be a huge strain on the psyche. But how did Jung connect these experiences to the positive side of things, to actual creativity?
Well, you remember that whole idea of the vulnerable creative child?
Yeah, we talked about that a few episodes back.
Right. Well, Jung believed that artists are the people who stay connected to that part of themselves, that polymorphous creative child.
So they're still tapped into that unconscious world, the world of imagination and archetypes and all that.
Exactly. And he thought creativity might actually come from bridging those eternal truths of the unconscious with, the socially acceptable ways we express them.
So like finding a way to translate those primal energies into something that makes sense in the real world.
Yeah. But if you can't build that bridge, well, that's where things can go really wrong. Jung even compares it to looking directly at Medusa.
That whole turning the stone thing.
Right. It's like that unmediated encounter with the raw power of the unconscious. It can be paralyzing.
Okay, so we've got these archetypes influencing everything we do. But how do they actually show up? How do we even recognize them?
That's where symbols and myths come in. Remember, Jung saw these as the language of the unconscious, not just like literary devices, but expressions of deep psychological truths.
The Red Book is full of examples of that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For example, Jung describes this encounter he has with Elijah and Salome.
Hold on, Elijah, as in the biblical prophet.
That's the one. And Salome, the one who asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I see where you're going with this. So we've got Elijah representing spiritual wisdom and Salome representing, well, something a little more earthly.
Right. It's like this clash of opposites. So picture this. Jung finds himself in this incredibly opulent hall. And there they are, Elijah and Salome side by side. And it triggers this absolute whirlwind of emotions in him. Longing, fear, attraction, even disgust.
Sounds pretty intense.
It is. And Jung sees it as a perfect example of what he calls the confrontation with the shadow. These figures represent opposing forces within himself.
His struggle to, like, reconcile these forces, right?
Yeah.
To integrate them into a whole.
Yeah, and, that's at the heart of his whole journey in the Red Book.
And that journey, in a lot of ways, mirrors the journey of anyone who's trying to, be creative.
Exactly. That process of working with the unconscious, it's like alchemy. It can fuel creative expression, but, it's not without risks. That same process can lead to all sorts of psychological turmoil.
Which brings us right back to the big question about the Red Book. Was Jung's deep dive into the unconscious the spark that ignited his creativity or a descent into madness?
Yeah.
Or was it both?
It's a tough one, for sure. Did the Red Book make Jung a creative genius, or did it push him over the edge?
It really does make you think. But what about, the rest of us? What can we learn from Jung's journey in the Red Book?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? I think one of the biggest takeaways is this. Creativity isn't just about technique, It's about something deeper. It's about connecting with this wellspring of imagery, of symbolism that Jung thought we all share.
You're talking about the archetypes again, right? Those primal patterns we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Those blueprints for our emotions, our behaviors, everything, really. And Jung saw the archetypes as driving creative impulses, too.
Okay, so let's say I'm a writer who wants to tap into this creative wellspring, this unconscious energy. How do I do that? Do I need to meditate for hours, try to have visions like Jung?
Well, you don't necessarily have to go to those extremes. What Jung describes in the Red Book is kind of an amplified version of what we all go through when we're being creative.
So you're saying there are parallels between Jung's experience and, say, a painter trying to get the perfect shade of blue or a musician writing a song.
Absolutely. Think about it. All those things involve exploring, right? Experimenting or trying to grasp something that's just out of reach. And that struggle, that tension between the conscious and the unconscious mind, that's where the creative energy comes from.
But that tension can also be a source of frustration, right? Even turmoil. How do we make sure we're not going too far? Like, how do we avoid that mad genius territory?
Well, that's where this idea of mindful engagement comes in. Jung wasn't just along for the ride, He wasn't passively letting these visions and dreams control him. He wrestled with them. He questioned them. He tried to understand them.
So it's all about intentionality, being willing to explore, but also, keeping a clear head about it all.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another important point here, too. Jung didn't do this all alone. He spent a lot of time in isolation, yeah. But he also had mentors, colleagues he could talk to.
It's a good reminder that even Jung, this guy who was exploring the depths of the psyche, needed to connect with the outside world.
Right. He knew how dangerous it could be to go too far into those depths all by yourself. It's like having a guide when you're exploring a dark forest. Someone who can show you the way, offer a different perspective, someone who can even pull you back if you start to lose your way.
So creative exploration needs a balance. Time alone, but time with others too.
Exactly. And a healthy dose of self-compassion wouldn't hurt either. I mean, even Jung struggled. The Red Book isn't a guidebook to perfect mental health, but it does show us how challenging and rewarding this exploration can be.
It sounds like we can learn a lot from Jung's journey,
Yeah.
even if we don't follow his exact path.
Oh, absolutely. The Red Book gives us a map, a language to start to understand these deeper forces within us that shape our creativity. It shows us how exciting and terrifying the creative process can be, and ultimately that it's a journey worth taking.
So for our listener today, someone who might be struggling to find their creative voice or maybe even battling some inner demons, what's the most important thing they should remember from the Red Book?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to remember that the unconscious isn't something to be afraid of. It's powerful, sure, but it's also where all this incredible creative energy comes from. To just approach it with respect,
Mhm.
with intention, with awareness, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it.
That's great advice. Everyone needs support sometimes, especially when we're venturing into uncharted territory.
Right. Now, before we move on, there's one more thing I wanted to share. Jung said something that I think perfectly sums up what we've been talking about. He said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves."
I love that. It reminds us that creativity isn't all hard work and discipline. There's joy in it, too, a sense of playfulness.
Exactly. And that playfulness, that willingness to experiment, to explore without judging yourself, that's how you tap into the creative power of the unconscious.
So as we move on to the final part of this episode, I want our listener to think about that word play. What brings you joy in your creative work? What makes you feel alive? What do you want to explore more deeply?
Great questions. And as we continue, we're going to look more closely at Jung's own creative process. How he used active imagination and other techniques to access the wisdom of the unconscious. We'll also talk about the shadow self and how facing those darker parts of ourselves can actually fuel creative growth.
Sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack. Stay tuned as we wrap up our exploration of the Red Book and the link between creative genius and the depths of the human mind. So much to think about. Archetypes, the shadow, this idea of creative play. It's amazing. But I keep picturing Jung as this scientist of the soul, this explorer pushing the boundaries of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about him. And remember, he didn't just do this for himself. He thought that by facing his own inner darkness, he was contributing to something bigger, like a kind of collective healing.
So not just a personal journey then.
No, he felt a real responsibility to tackle these big questions. Good versus evil, the meaning of life, what spirituality means in a world that was changing so rapidly.
Makes you wonder how much of the Red Book applies to, everyone else, if it's so specific to his experience.
Well, I think it depends on how we use Jung's insights. Remember, he wasn't laying down the law or anything. He was offering a way to think about the psyche, one that recognized how complex and mysterious our inner worlds are.
It's like he's given us this whole new vocabulary to talk about the things that have always been there, hidden under the surface.
Exactly. And with this new vocabulary, we get tools to navigate those hidden parts, to tap into that unconscious creativity without being overwhelmed by it.
So for someone listening today, someone who might feel lost on their own creative path, what's the most important thing they should remember from the Red Book?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to remember not to fear the unconscious. It's full of wisdom, and it's this incredible source of creative energy. But approach it carefully, with intention. And, don't be afraid to reach out if you need some support.
It's a long process, right? Exploring the unconscious.
It really is. And we all have to find our own way. There's no one right path. Just stay curious. Keep exploring. Trust the process.
And remember that you're not alone. So many people have gone on this journey before, and we can learn from them.
Exactly. Jung's Red Book is personal, yeah. But it speaks to all of us. It shows us the challenges, the triumphs of figuring out this vast, mysterious landscape of the unconscious.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to ask our listeners to think about their own relationship with the unconscious. What are your hopes, your anxieties? What do you want to explore more deeply? And, the most important thing, how can you bring more awareness, more intention to your own creative work so you can tap into that inspiration within you?
Powerful questions. And as you go on your own creative journey, remember, the unconscious is always there waiting, full of infinite possibility. It's yours to explore.
Beautiful. And on that note, we're wrapping up this deep dive into the Red Book. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with another look at creativity and the mind. Until then, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep trusting that inner wisdom.